So I have here with me Hemant Mehta. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
So you are pretty prominent in the atheist community. You have been for a lot of years. Like, tell me about that. What kinds of things do you do?
Sure. So I've been in different parts of the movement, if you want to call it that, for like the better part of 15 to 20 years, somewhere in there. I was a college activist. Like I started an atheist group at my college. I was on the board of the Secular Student Alliance, worked with the Secular Coalition for America. Also worked with a number of organizations that promote atheism, church-state separation, things like that. And for the past 10 years or so, I've been writing on friendlyatheist.com and doing that sort of thing. I've written a couple books, do some stuff on YouTube. It's all over the place. I have a podcast. I mean, so it's a little bit of everything, but primarily it's the website where I write about current events and stuff that atheists might want to know about.
Right. I have a podcast. Some people may not know about my podcast, but on my podcast from time to time, usually I'm reading news articles about various different things. And I will come across the Friendly Atheist on Pathos, right? Is that what it is?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll read some of those articles. I really love the opinions and the information that you put out on that. So I have to say I appreciate you working on that. I'm really glad to see that you're in the atheist community. And I actually didn't know about your connections to the SSA. Like, how did you get started in this movement? How was it? Like, have you always been an atheist or?
So I became an atheist in high school and didn't really do anything with it other than try to figure out, does this make sense? Is this right? And by the time I was, middle of high school, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm right about this, and everyone else is wrong about the whole religion thing, which I think is a fairly common thing a lot of us think at some point. But in college, like my second year of school, I was like, I kind of want to meet a bunch of other atheists. I don't know how to do that. Long story short, I ended up connecting with another student who was an atheist, and both of us wanted to start a group. And she actually had connections in the sense that she had been a counselor at Camp Quest, which is like a summer camp for children of atheist parents. So like she knew people and she knew organizations, and she said, yeah, we could start a group on our college. What we might want to do is get it affiliated with a larger group like the Secular Student Alliance. And again, this is something every religious group does too. Like, oh, you want to join Campus Crusade for Christ on your campus? I mean, there's a larger movement where there's a bunch of people doing the same thing. So we started our group, got connected with SSA. So I actually learned, oh, there's a bunch of people out there just like me. That's really neat. I think if I have it right, at some point SSA said we're having a conference. They were too small to run their own at the time, but they said we're latching on to another group's conference, but we'll have a few segments just for students. And they were giving scholarships to anyone. They said, if you want a scholarship, like there's an essay contest or something. And I won it. Maybe I was the only applicant. That's entirely possible. But they basically paid for my flight to go to this conference. And it was amazing. That was the first time I'm just surrounded by a handful of students. There weren't many of us, but a lot of adults who just made sense. And at the time, I mean, they weren't really talking about atheism so much as at the time, evolution and creationism in schools was a big thing. So there were lectures on that because creationism, intelligent design was a big thing at the time. And I just remember thinking like, yes, these people make sense. They're not apologizing for being right about this stuff. And that's awesome. And I love the fact that there is a student component to it. And that's awesome. I wish it were bigger because there's like a dozen of us maximum at this place. And next thing I think I knew is that the Secular Student Alliance was looking for board members to, as they do every year. And I got elected to their board. And that's kind of how I got involved on the back end of things. Like, oh, this is how they actually work. This is how they this is how they manage the organization and run it. And this was a small, relatively, fledgling organization at the time. I don't even think we had a paid staffer, much less multiple of them. So it was really cool to kind of I was there for maybe 6, 7 years on the board where we saw it grow, where we saw, ourselves getting staffers, learning how to ask for donations for what the work we were doing, which is always an awkward thing to do. But through them, I met a lot of the other national organizations. I found out, oh, there's a whole bunch of different groups. Some of them focus on lawsuits, some focus on spreading atheism, some just don't care. And they're like, yeah, we're atheists, but we care about church state separation and politics. And I got a chance to meet these people and learn about them and people who, what I think what happened is at some point, if you read an article about atheism in the news, they always quote, a handful of people.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I know those people now. That's really neat. Like, I know the executive director of that
It is
organization.
neat. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I've been through that same thing.
Yeah. And so I'm just like, it's cool. Like, I'm knowing the people who are actively promoting these beliefs that I have that I always thought were super unpopular.
Hmm.
But no, there's a whole world out there of people like us. So that just got my taste for I like being an activist. I like working with these people in this movement. And I got a long story, lucky break where I was, I had quit grad school. I was looking to figure out what to do. And I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I ended up posting on eBay this thing about like, I'll go to church to wherever someone wants me to go because I've never been there personally. And all the atheists I know have totally grown up in the church
Right.
in Christianity. And that just opened a few doors in terms of like, oh, people were interested in that experiment. I got to write a book about it. That was really neat. And I also started the website as a way to kind of say, oh, hey, this is what I'm doing after the book. And that just kind of took off on its own from there. So I've
Right.
been doing it ever since.
That actually brings me to my next question for you. I guess you didn't grow up in church then, did you?
No, I don't even think I had been to a church service in any real way. Not because it wasn't around me, not because maybe I hadn't been invited, just because I grew up, as a Jain. I was in an Indian family. I am in an Indian family. But they took me to a temple in a small religion that most people had not heard of. And it was fine. It's nothing traumatic for me. As far as religions go, you could do a lot worse.
Right.
So it was fine, but I really didn't have any personal exposure to going to church or a mosque or a synagogue or anything. And at some point, when you realize it's kind of like if you're an atheist and you want to debate atheism or talk about it, it really does help to know what most people grow up believing. So I think a lot of the most vocal atheists that are popular online and writing the books, they come from a Christian background. They were fundamentalists growing up. They know what this stuff is. And I'm only learning about it secondhand. And like
Right.
I know about it, but I wasn't there. And so going to a bunch of Christian churches for the first time, it's like, oh, I will give you this. I thought I kind of understood it. It was a much wider spectrum of Christianity than even I had considered. And now I try to go out of my way if I'm writing something on the website. Like, it's unfair to slam all Christians for whatever you want to complain about, because there's a whole bunch of them who probably agree with me on like 99% of the values and issues. And it's like, I don't care to fight you on the God thing because it's just a low priority. There are other pressing issues. So
If we can
whatever.
all kind of come together on social issues, for example, or
Yeah, I mean,
political issues.
exactly. Progressive Christians, more power to you because I think those issues are so much more important than the fact that they're wrong about God.
Yes.
And so
I'm
it's like,
so with you on that.
I just don't care to argue with them. And there are atheists who are like, but they're wrong. And I'm like, yes, they are. But also, who cares? Because look at the other shit we're up against.
Yep.
Let's talk about that. Because at least this is why I actually don't mind when, for example, Democrats are like, I have a religious outreach person, or I'm trying to communicate to Christians. That's fine. That's a strategic thing to do because there are a ton of Christians who are very progressive in their politics. And it's like, yeah, you should go after them. There's no reason, Republicans should have a monopoly on religion in politics. Because there's a difference between saying, Pete Buttigieg saying, I'm inspired by my Christian faith to do X, Y, and Z, and Mike Pence saying, oh, I'm Christian, therefore all of you get no rights, So
Right, exactly. There is a distinct difference between the two, and it is important to recognize. I think that the key point behind a lot of this is the black and white. The more extreme you get, the less nuance you see, the more of a problem it is, right?
right.
Like Pence is clearly an extremist in a lot of ways, and
Right.
that is an issue. But it, Buttigieg seems to have some level of nuance with religion and policies
So,
and things like
yeah.
that.
And so does Elizabeth Warren. And honestly, Cory Booker like can't say a sentence without including a Bible verse,
Mm.
but he's the same way. Like, yeah, these people are religious to varying degrees of practice. But again, none of that. If you listen to them, if you look at their platforms, like it doesn't really bother me that much when they bring up religion. Hey, that's fine. I think it's a good thing actually, because maybe it'll get some of the people who for some reason can't make up their mind. If they hear Democrats talking about religion, maybe they'll be like, "Oh, some Democrats, more than not, have religion, and maybe I don't have to choose
Maybe
between
I can
religion."
be included under that umbrella too.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, like that is a very different thing from saying, let's make policy on the basis of their religious beliefs, which none of them are advocating for. So I don't know. That part doesn't bother me as
That's
much.
fascinating. I can see what you're saying with the, policy differences versus trying to be inclusive and allow the party or allow the group to be more inclusive toward more people.
Yeah.
And generally, I think for the most part, I am for inclusivity. Let me see if I can get your take on this. My
Yeah.
daughter had a school play just last night, and it was a Christmas play. And I didn't realize that they were allowed to do Christmas stuff, but apparently, I guess they can do Christmas-related plays as long as it's not about Jesus.
So the caveat here is I'm not a lawyer, but
Sure.
in general, yes, public schools can do Christmas carols, Christmas plays, Christmas songs. It might just be the wording. It depends. Like if there's a nativity play taking place on stage, that has clearly crossed the line. If if they're singing like a whole bunch of very pro Jesus songs. Like it's one thing to throw Silent Night in there, even though that's about Jesus, versus like a whole series of songs that is not secular in any way, because there is a commercial aspect to Christianity, which is fine. But again, there's a difference, I think, between we are pushing the Christian myth during this public school concert, and these are just popular Christmas songs that we might all want to sing. There's a difference between like ignorance and the malice here.
Yeah.
And there are some people that actively want to promote the Jesus stuff during these Christmas plays. Legally, that's when you can get groups to say, hey, you got to put a stop to this. The school has to stop this. For the concerts where they're just singing a bunch of Christmas carols and stuff, and some of them mention God and Jesus, and a lot of them don't, I don't think you're going to get much of a fight from anyone. But it also could be a thing where a parent might want to say, hey, where are other holiday songs? Because, hey, Jews sing songs over the holidays too. They have a thing. And there are some other secular songs you could sing. Is there a reason you're only picking these? Maybe that's the fault of the teacher, even if it's not legal.
How do you feel about it? Like, would you rather not see Christmas anything in school, or are you okay with some Christmas stuff? Or
It's fine with me. I mean, I was a teacher for 7 years and we did stuff all the time. But again, in the classroom, we're doing more secular versions of it. Like, sure, like, oh, what are you doing for Christmas? Let's do a Secret Santa sort of thing. There's a difference between celebrating the break, the winterness, the holidays of it all, and saying like, oh yes, this is the Jesus time of year. And again, I think most kids, especially like nowadays, realize, oh no, but I have friends who don't celebrate this specific holiday,
Right.
and we should acknowledge that at least. And I think, good public schools, for the most part, they do acknowledge that, oh, there are other things going on.
Yeah.
There's not just one game in town, even if one is more popular than all the rest of them.
Yeah.
And if you go to a crappy public school, they won't do that because they don't know any better, or they're actively like pushing Christianity on kids.
Yeah. Well, lucky for me so far, my daughter hasn't had to deal with too much. Like my platform is like 150,000 people or something like that. And I'm just like a watchdog right now, just sitting here watching for them to do something. And I'm just going to like start a phone call campaign against them.
This is the thing. This is what I think has been really good. And I can't speak for the Freedom from Religion Foundation because I don't work there or anything. But one of the good things is by the fact that they write these letters to districts that do cross the line and get media attention for it, it does create a lot of watchdogs in places where people might not have been paying attention. So they might get complaints from people saying, hey, this is going on at my school. Is this a problem? And part of it is they can only write letters if they hear about it from local people who are
Right.
concerned. They're not going out there and saying, I wonder where, shit's going down.
Mm.
No, they got to hear from people. And the good thing about raising these issues on YouTube, on through the letters, through the media, whatever, is that more people realize, oh, you're not allowed to do that, but they do that at my school. I should tell someone about this. And that's a very positive thing. That's why it helps to have channels like yours where they bring these up. Because maybe if someone is watching this saying, oh, wait, maybe at my school they do have a concert where it's all very religious songs, and maybe that crosses a line. In which case, hey, we can direct you to FFRF or the American Humanist Association or American Atheist or any number of legal groups that have a legal side to it that could actually have professionals look at that for you.
Switching gears, I was wondering
Yeah.
if you can tell me a little bit about the Jains, because I've heard a little bit about them. Like, what's the belief system behind that?
Sure. And it was weird because I remember reading Sam Harris's The End of Faith, and
Hmm.
he's condemning a lot of religious, like fundamentalist religion, but he actually goes out of his way to praise Jainism as like if you had extremist Jains, that would not be such a bad
I
thing.
remember that.
I laughed at that because I'm like, this is the first time I've seen it acknowledged by other people. But yeah, no, they primarily Jainism believes in nonviolence. And that's an awesome philosophical thing. So if you're talking like extremist Jain, we are talking people who cover their mouths when they talk. So you're not getting the bacteria in the air, sweeping the ground they walk on. So they're not stepping on any bugs or anything. I was raised vegetarian. You're supposed to not have bad thoughts in your head. So I mean, those are the basic beliefs I grew up with. I mean, there is an idea of reincarnation and karma, and the idea that if you will have another life and you will shed your karma, and you will, when you get reincarnated, you will become another being in a better position in life. That's how I was taught it. I don't know if that's theologically accurate, but as a human, I'm in a pretty damn good place, is how I was taught it. But you could become a god of sorts, even if it's not the creator God. That's kind of the random stuff I was taught growing up, and I stopped believing before I kind of delved into the theological nuances of Jainism. So there's a lot of stuff that maybe a professor or a theologian could tell you, or an older Jain could tell you that I may not know. But I remember growing up reading a list. We know there are 24 beings that have reincarnated out of the cycle, and they are the deities that we pray to. And you memorize the list, and you memorize the animals that are their representatives and stuff like that. That is weird to outsiders.
That's extremely interesting. So do they have like a
Yeah.
holy book or?
Uh, they very well may, and I never read it because we read stories. We had mantras and chants that we said when we would like meet at the temple or gather with family members. But again, even when I left Jainism, I think what stuck with me is philosophically, a lot of this stuff makes sense, even without a religious argument for
Mhm.
it. So the argument to still be vegetarian, that all made sense to me, even without any religious side to it. It had nothing to do with karma and everything to do with, well, it's ethically wrong to kill animals, isn't it? And I could make that argument, and it's not like it was hard to stay vegetarian because I didn't have to change anything. But a lot of the philosophical stuff makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's a good way to live, to try to not have bad thoughts and to think bad things. So again, it could have been worse as far as religions
Right.
go, but I don't think it would be fair to call myself a Jain still, because all the supernatural aspects of it don't make any sense.
So, what about your family? Like, since you have kind of basically become a vocal atheist in the atheist movement, has there been any kind of backlash? Like, how do they feel about it?
Not as worse as I've heard from a lot of people, but we went through a phase of like they were upset, but they were upset because they don't really understand atheism. They only think they know what it is, and it's all bad.
Right.
And by and large, once they realized, oh, you're not really that different, you haven't changed who you are as a person, then they kind of backed off. And now we're at the point where we don't really even talk about it. It doesn't come in the way of anything. Sometimes they will take my kids to the temple, and it's more like, oh, you want to babysit the kids for a while? Go do whatever the hell you want. It's fine. I'm not going to fight you on this one. There's
Because
you
it's
figure out.
largely not harmful generally. Is that how you feel
Right.
about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried that they're going to come back and learn stuff that they're not going to unlearn at some point
Right.
anyway. So it's like, whatever. If you want to teach them the basics, it's not going to be a problem. And honestly, it's kind of like going to their Sunday school is
Mm.
a lot of coloring and drawing more than it is indoctrination.
Sure.
So I'm not worried about that. But no, I just remember like it only really comes into play when we're talking about the big rituals, right? So for a wedding, is it going to be a religious wedding? And for me, it was not, because I made a point of saying, no, this is like, no, the wedding's about me. So me, my partner, will decide how to do this. And so we did it the way we wanted to. It wasn't religious. When I had a baby and my parents wanted to do a religious ceremony, it's like, you know what? You can have this one. I won't get in the way of that. So you find a compromise. You figure out how to make it work. We have a good relationship family wise. So it doesn't come in the way, thankfully.
Mm.
But also, we don't really talk about it, much less argue.
I actually, I've personally faced some level of backlash for for the decisions that I've made with my daughter. For example, she went with my mom, who is a Jehovah's Witness, an active Jehovah's Witness. She went to a few meetings, and I realized pretty quickly it's not a good idea, because there are some things there that she may very well not unlearn.
Right.
But I did end up sending her to a normal church, just like standard run-of-the-mill Methodist, don't hate anybody for anything kind of church, because I felt like it was valuable to kind of have the cultural context that comes with it. People did not like that.
You mean atheists didn't like
Yeah,
that?
atheists did not like that. They felt like it was a bad idea. In retrospect, I think that the cultural context was probably valuable, but I did take a little bit of a risk by doing that, I think.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't have an opinion one way or the other on that. Again, there is some value. And this is, again, going back to, I didn't have those experiences in a good or bad way growing up. And I feel like I missed it's like never having watched The Simpsons or something at all. Like, yeah, you can do it, but there are conversations and references, or not knowing the Bible. There are conversations and references that you might miss out on because you don't understand what they're talking about. And so it's if an atheist says, I've never read the Bible, like, no, that's crazy. You don't have to read it word for word, but you should kind of know some cultural elements of it. Because if you don't understand the Adam and Eve story, if you don't know what Noah's Ark is all about, or the Jesus myth is all about, there are some things you're not going to understand about movies you like and TV you like and books that you're reading, because there are so many allusions to all of this stuff. I mean, it's a part of the culture, whether you like it or not. And so I don't know. I just want to know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you get this. I get this all the time on YouTube. Like, how come you never talk about the Quran as much as you talk about the Bible? And there's a couple reasons for that. One is I don't know it as well as I know the Bible. And I'm not saying I know the Bible very well or anything like that. But also, it's not the book that comes up in conversations much in the US, in our shared culture. So I don't feel like I'm missing out on as much by not knowing specifics of the Islamic stories as I would be not knowing the biblical stories.
Right.
So, I work with high school kids now too, and we do public speaking, and sometimes they have to make stuff up on the spot. And there are reference books that are like, these are cultural things you should know about. You should know about Greek mythology because these stories come up again and again. You should know what Pandora's box is all about. And it's like, yeah, because you might get a reference to it somewhere, so you should know it. And some of those books also have a lot of biblical stuff. And we tell the kids, like, yeah, you should know what these are, even if you didn't grow up in this, because there's a context to it that would be valuable as any educated person, that you should know what they're talking about. Yeah. So if you see the reference, you kind of know what they're doing. So it doesn't bother me that you take your kid to church or something, or an atheist says, yeah, I took my kid to Sunday school. There's an element of that could be a problem. But like you're saying, just going there, understanding how church works for a lot of Americans, that's a huge thing. Yeah. If you're an atheist who's never been to church, you're missing out on a conversation that a lot of people are having. So I also don't get the atheist argument like, oh, these politicians are running, how dare they bring up religion? Or that, Elizabeth Warren will a lot of times talk about her religious upbringing and how her faith plays a role in her life. That's fine. That's what a lot of Americans have done. And she's speaking their language. Good. I want them to like her and vote for her. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes.
that,
100%.
that in itself is not a problem because that is what hundreds of millions of Americans have dealt with. So, yeah, you got to understand that language. You got to speak that language. You don't have to agree with it or endorse it, but you got to know it.
Yes.
And so I'm all for people understanding this stuff. I got lucky that when I was doing that eBay thing, I actually got a chance to visit this whole variety of Christian churches from like the Joel Osteen, literally his mega church, to, a living room because a guy was starting a church and just trying to build it from scratch, an evangelical one, to a black church on the south side of Chicago. And you really get a sense of like, wow, these people are doing everything so differently, even though they have shared beliefs, the way they interpret them and make use of that in their lives is so wildly different. And so it really does become unfair when you see atheists saying, Christianity is harmful. Yeah. Or Christopher Hitchens saying religion is a poison or whatever.
Poisons everything.
Yeah, religion poisons everything. It's like, no, that means you have no idea how people are using it, because some of the churches I went to, it's clearly a force for good in their lives.
Right.
And what they are doing with it to help other people. And so for someone to say, no, it poisons everything, no, because the message it's sending to all these people is, oh, atheists have a problem with charity, or like actual charity, or actual not proselytizing, but helping people, because that's what some of them are doing. You got to acknowledge that. And it doesn't mean you're saying they're right about it.
So that is an extremely fascinating take on it, because that's kind of how I built my YouTube channel. I discovered that in a lot of ways, like the atheist community on YouTube is a limited market cap, and so I wanted to focus more on cults and see if I could build bridges with Christians to fight destructive cults. So that's kind of been my angle with it. I actually have a lot of Christian subscribers, interestingly enough. Every now and then I say something about evolution just being factual, and I get a lot of pushback from time to time. But you know what? That comes with the territory, and I'm glad they're there helping me fight it. So
there are Christians who read my website, go to the YouTube channel too. And again, by and large, when you're writing about church-state separation or the issues at hand and the harmfulness of certain kinds of religion, most of those people are with you, which is always a good thing.
Yes. And a minute ago, you mentioned Islam and the fact that you don't cover it. And I get a lot of people coming on and saying, oh, you don't cover Islam and all of that other stuff. It's exactly the same for me as it is for you. Like, it doesn't come up. I mean, I'll sit there and I will tell you to your face, yes, Islam has a lot of harmful aspects. And yes, there are Islamic cults out there that are an issue. For example, ISIS. But, I live in the U.S. and Islam just is not really as much of an issue for me personally. That's why I don't address it.
It's not a political issue as much. By and large, the Islamic communities, like, we just want the right to practice in peace. They're not trying to hurt people.
Right.
So when people are trying to slam Islam as a whole or use this broad brush to paint it, it's not just wrong. I mean, it's ignorant. It makes you look stupid, whoever's saying it.
100%.
Yeah. And again, I will write about it when it comes up in the news for some reason or another. But the idea of picking apart the nuances of the Quran or the Hadiths or something, that's an exercise that doesn't benefit any of the stuff I care about, because it only kind of makes sense to untangle that stuff if everyone is aware of what it says, which they're not. So, I mean, even when Islam comes up in my world, it's in a political aspect, and it's usually people saying some stupid stuff out of ignorance.
Right.
And it's most Muslims end up fighting a lot of the same fights I'm fighting for religious freedom and the idea, like, let me just practice. I'm not hurting anybody. Let me practice what I want to practice. And for the most part, every time I see Muslims in the news, it's usually because they are being attacked from like the Christian right.
Yeah, I know one thing that I get a lot of people saying on my channel is usually it's something like, are you going to call Islam a cult yet? Or something like that. And I say the same thing about Islam as I do about Christianity. That's entirely too broad. Christianity is not a cult. We need to look at individual groups. Mormonism is a cult. Jehovah's Witnesses is a cult. Jonestown was a cult. Heaven's Gate was a cult.
Yeah, it depends how you want to define this stuff, and
Yeah,
just throw around the word without explaining what you mean by it.
right.
It's like religion too. I mean, like some people could argue baseball is a religion. It's
Mm,
like, yeah, you could, but we are talking about very different definitions of that word.
right. And
Just because it's a religion doesn't mean it's a cult
right,
necessarily.
exactly. Cults and religions are not synonymous. And so when
Right.
people say Islam is a cult, I just disagree. Islam is not a cult. There are Islamic cults, but as a whole,
Right.
that's entirely too broad. Before we close up here, I wanted to see if you could give me one more time where people can find you and where we should look.
Sure. So friendlyatheist.com is the easiest way to get to my site. That's where I do most of my work. There is my YouTube channel that is just search for Friendly Atheist on YouTube. You'll find that. Just Google it. You'll find stuff. There's a podcast. Last year I did a project that I was really proud of. It was a whole history of the Pledge of Allegiance. That's also on my YouTube channel, but it's called the Supreme Court versus church-state separation. So if you listen to podcasts and that's your thing, go check that out, because it was a long amount of research, but I think it's a really interesting history that we don't really talk about much.
Yeah, very cool. And I will put links to all that stuff in the description. So if you just scroll down, you can click on that. One more note before we get off of here, though. You were talking about the history of the Pledge of Allegiance. Do you remember the Barnett girls? Like the court case with the Barnett girls where they were fighting for the...
Yeah.
They were Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
They were in my congregation when I
Real?
knew them. Yes, I knew one of them.
I remember, I believe this is right. It's been a while since I looked at my own script for this, but I think there was a story about how one of the Barnetts was saying that her own son was at a public school and didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance and was sent to the principal's office. And the principal basically laughed it off, saying, your teacher doesn't know who like your mother is, does
Right.
she?
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I know one of the episodes of that podcast begins with the actual facts of that story,
Right.
but she told that at a separate legal thing they were doing about the case. But that's
Right.
really interesting. And this is one thing I also point out, and you know this, which is that Jehovah's Witnesses, yeah, they have their problems. But when it comes to legal cases, they're actually like heroes in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, because they were fighting to have the right to practice their faith, and they were fighting against this imposition of like government mandated Christianity.
That's very true. I mean, even the most harmful groups can be beneficial in various different ways. So
Right. And one thing I've seen over the years of working with atheist organizations is there has been much more acceptance of that over time, to the point where atheist groups routinely work with progressive religious organizations because we're working towards similar goals. So like for this administration, for example, fighting faith-based policies that hurt non-Christians or people who don't agree with those conservative Christian views, there's a lot of atheist groups working hand in hand with like Jewish organizations, interfaith organizations, because we're all fighting the same battles here. And a lot of our shared values, like put aside the religious differences, and there's a lot we have in common. So more
Right.
power to them.
yeah, I think that can be a key takeaway of this whole thing is we should be able to work with people and find common ground to accomplish things that we all want to accomplish, and nuance is so incredibly important. So
Yeah.
with that being said, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me. It's been an amazing interview, and maybe we'll talk again one of these days, okay?
Hope so.
If you like what I do and you want to make sure I can continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, you can support me on Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring. I'm trying to make a shirt design for every cult I've covered. I haven't gotten every one, but I'm working on it. So check it out and see if your cult is up there. Second, you can support me by checking out my game shop. I sell controller, cartridge, and game box stands for every system from the original Nintendo and Sega Game Gear to the Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. So give that a look too. And finally, if you want to support me in some way other than monetarily, you can check out my other YouTube channels. I have a retro game channel where I answer questions like, why does Shy Guy have a mask? And why are CRT TVs the best way to play retro games? I also have the podcast where I talk about stuff I don't feel I can say on a monetized channel. And finally, I have my main channel where I talk about cults. I wish I didn't have to worry about dancing around subjects carefully in the first place, but I chose to do this as a full-time job. So unfortunately, I rely on YouTube's AdSense and on the support of patrons to continue doing the work I do. Anyways, check me out in all those places if you haven't already. Thanks for listening, guys.